What's up everybody, welcome to my channel where I will help you level up your skills to become one of the best DBAs. In this video today, you will learn the skills necessary to deploy and scale an Azure SQL database. Now if you have never done this before, by the end of this video, you will have all the skills and knowledge required to do this. This has been taken from my course on Udemy, Azure SQL Administration. The link will be in the description of this video. And guess what? I've made it available 50% off for you. Now before I get into this video, it's important that you know that the way you separate yourself from others is learn the skills that they don't have. And this is what I've been doing all over the years. And I'm now imparting my skills and knowledge for you to separate yourself so you can stand out in that interview. So with that said guys, let's head over to my laptop and get cracking. In this lecture, we're going to be creating our first Azure SQL database. So if you are not yet logged into your portal, head over to portal.azure.com and sign in. If you are not seeing Azure SQL, in the resource section, search for Azure SQL and then select Azure SQL. Also, you can select create resource, select databases and then select create Azure SQL. Here you have three options. You can create SQL databases, SQL managed instances, or SQL virtual machines. For this course, we're going to be focused on Azure SQL databases. So for the resource type, right, you can choose single database, elastic pool, or database server. If you don't plan to create any other database, you can select single database, then create database. So the first thing we would need to select is our subscription. So if your account is newly created, you should only have one subscription, and that is the subscription for the free tier. So by default, Azure subscription 1 is selected. We currently don't have any resource group, so we need to create a resource group. So if you hover over this information icon, a resource group is a collection of resources that share the same life cycle, permissions, and policy. So select create new resource group and specify a name for your resource group. So I'm going to call this DP300 and then select OK. For the database name, you can call it anything. I'm going to call it Udemy DP300. Now we need to create a server for our database because we don't have any existing one. Now this is not a server where you'll have access to the operating system, as this will be all managed by Microsoft. So what we'll be basically creating is a logical server. So select create new and specify a name for your server. Keep in mind that this must be unique. So if you specify, for example, test, then it will show you that the specified server name is already in use. So I'm going to call the server teach them. For the authentication method, we have three options to choose from. We can use only Azure Active Directory authentication, both SQL and Azure Active Directory authentication, or SQL Server authentication only. So SQL authentication is basically where you're just using the username and password, right? While for Azure authentication is where you'll be using your Azure account and password to log in. So we're going to be using SQL authentication for now. Here you need to specify a name for your admin login. You can only have one server admin login. So I'm going to call this user SQL admin. I'm going to head over to my notepad and create a password. Once you have specified and confirmed your password, select OK. Do you want to use an elastic pool? For this case, no. However, in a case where you are going to be managing multiple databases, it would be ideal that you utilize an elastic pool to manage your database resources. On the compute and storage, for the free tier, the default compute tier is standard SO with 10 DTUs and 250 GB of storage. However, let's select configure database. On the service and compute tier, you can configure your database performance as well as the pricing of your database. So because we're utilizing the free tier, we're not allowed to scale more than 10 DTUs. So if we scale it, you'll see that the data max size is not shown. Now as you can see from the point that we can scale it to, as we increase the DTU, we are allowed to increase the maximum database size, so we can go up to a maximum of 1 gigabyte. Now in the service tier drop down, you will see two major categories for the pricing tiers. You have the vCore based purchasing model. The V in vCore stands for virtual, so it's pretty much virtual CPU cores. And at the bottom, you have the DTU based purchasing model. You can think of DTU as horsepower in cars because it directly affects the performance of the database. DTU represents a mixture of CPU, memory, data I/O, and log I/O as a single performance metric for Azure SQL databases. So the main idea of the DTU concept is to offer pre-configured resource configuration to clients so that it simplifies the scaling of the performance over a single metric, so that if we need more performance, we can slide the bar and increase the number of DTU in the Azure SQL database easily. So let's select the basic for less demanding workloads. As you can see, the estimated cost of our database dropped by over 60%. So here the maximum gigabytes is 2 and we can go down to as low as 0.1 gigabyte for the database size. Now let's expand the service tier again. Now the vCore based purchasing model is more of a traditional concept where you can decide on the number of resources for each database. So because we're on the free tier again, we can only select the general purpose. Over in a paid subscription, you can select hyperscale and the business critical models. So let's select general purpose. Now as you can see, we have two compute tiers to choose from, the provisioned and the serverless. The provision is basically where I have resources carved out for me and I am going to pay for them whether or not I use them. The serverless means that I don't have resources dedicated to me. Instead, they will auto-scale and I'll pay per second based on the amount of vCores. So here in the provision, you can select your compute hardware, right? So if you select change configuration, you will see the different hardware types that you can choose from. The standard series or Gen 5 have balanced memory and compute with a maximum of 128 vCores, with a maximum memory of 625 gigabytes, with a maximum storage of 4 terabytes, and the estimated cost per vCore per month is $184.09 US dollars. Now you have the FSV2 series, which is compute optimized. You have a maximum vCore of 72, maximum memory of 136 gigabytes, and a maximum storage of 4 terabytes. The estimated cost is $170.49 per vCore per month. And to the end, you have the DC series and the M series. So cancel for hardware configuration. And here you can choose to save some money if you already have an existing SQL Server license by applying your Azure Hybrid benefit. So if you select yes and confirm that you have a SQL Server license, you'll see that your estimated monthly cost has been reduced by 40%. So if I'm supposed to select no, you'll see that the price goes up to $368.49. So select yes. And this is ideal when you're making configuration for your production environment. However, for this course, we're going to be using the DTU model so we don't go over budget. You can always increase the maximum vCores. However, again, because we're utilizing the free tier in this course, we are not able to scale up to the maximum. Also keep in mind that as you scale your data max size, your log size here will scale as well, so they are directly proportional. When you increase your number of vCores, you can increase your maximum size. Would you like to make the database zone redundant? In this case, we'll say no because this will be additional cost to you. So what Microsoft will do is that it will create replicas across the availability zones in the region. Now when I select the serverless compute tier, I can also adjust the maximum vCores and the minimum vCores. Note, my estimated cost will be billed in seconds, so the estimate will be smaller upfront. So the serverless compute tier is a cost-effective way to run SQL Server, especially for non-production environments. So basically when there is no activity on the database will pause and then you will not be billed for those times when the database is not being used when compared to the provision model. So you have the option to choose the auto pause delay. So if there is no activity for 1 hour, then the database will be paused. When there is activity on the database, then the database automatically resumes. However, there will definitely be some latency. So I'm just going to scroll back up and select the DTU standard budget friendly, where my estimated cost is just $14.72 USD. Now select apply. So we're not going to select review and create just yet. We're going to select next to go to the networking tab. For the connectivity, the default is no access. However, select public endpoint so we can easily access the database once it is created. Under firewall rules, for now we don't want to allow Azure services and resources to access this server, so we're going to keep the default as no. At current client IP, we're going to keep the default as no for now, and I'll show you how you can add it manually later. The connection policy specifies how clients communicate with your SQL Server database. So we're going to keep the default. Select next to security. On the securities tab, you have various security measures that you can configure. However, we're not going to make any security changes just yet. So select additional settings. For the database we created, we can proceed to start with a blank database, restore from a backup, or load a sample. So we're going to select sample, which will load the AdventureWorks LT in our database. So select OK. For the database collation, because we are loading the database sample, we do not have the option to make changes to the collation again. So the database collation basically defines the rules that sorts and compare data and cannot be changed after database creation. The default collation is SQL Latin, General CP, CI, AS. Select next tags. Tags are optional. Then select review and create. Review all your configurations, and once you're satisfied, right, you can select create. The deployment will take a few minutes to complete. The deployment is now complete, so select go to resources. On the overview page, you will see your resource group, the location of your database instance, your server name. For Elastic Pool, we are not using any. You can always create Elastic Pools later. You can show the database connection string. So this is the connection string that you will be using in an application configuration. So select go back to resources again. And for the pricing tier, if you feel like you need to upgrade your pricing tier, you can always change it from here. So as you can see, I have the same options available to me like when I was creating the database instance. In the next lecture, we'll be taking a look at how we can connect to our database instance.